What if the most powerful flower plant on earth has been growing in the ditch behind your house this entire time, and nobody ever told you? Welcome back to Roots and Garden Secrets. I have been studying native plants and backyard food systems for over 2 decades, and I can tell you with complete confidence that the most overlooked food source in America is not hiding in some remote jungle or locked away in a laboratory. It is sitting right at the edge of your local pond, growing wild in the roadside ditch you drive past every single morning on your way to the grocery store. Here is the number that stopped me cold the first time I came across it. A single acre of this plant produces approximately 6,475 pounds of flour per year. 1 acre of wheat gives you somewhere between 200 and 400 pounds. We are talking about 16 times more flour from the exact same piece of land, with 0 planting, 0 irrigation, and 0 fertilizer required. By the time this video is done, you will know exactly what this plant is, why the agricultural industry buried it, and how you can grow it, manage it like a pro, and harvest your own free flour starting this season. If that sounds like the kind of knowledge you have been looking for, hit that like button and subscribe to Roots and Garden Secrets right now. You do not want to miss what is coming next. Before I tell you how to grow and harvest this plant, I want to give you just enough history to understand why this knowledge matters, and why losing it was one of the quietest mistakes our modern world ever made. In 2010, a research team led by Dr. Margaret Collins at Cambridge University published findings that rewrote what we thought we knew about early human civilization. Her team examined ancient grinding stones from 3 separate archaeological sites, one in southern Italy, one in Russia, and one in the Czech Republic. These stones dated back 30,000 years, and embedded deep in the microscopic grooves of the rock, researchers found something completely unexpected: starch grains, thousands of them, preserved for 300 centuries. When they identified the source, it was not wheat, not barley, not any grain we associate with civilization. It was the root of a wetland plant that still grows across North America today. Our ancestors were processing plant roots into flour 20,000 years before the first wheat seed was ever planted. They understood carbohydrate extraction. They passed that knowledge down through hundreds of generations. Until, somehow, in just the last few decades, we forgot it completely. The plant those ancient people were grinding is not rare. It is not exotic. You have seen it thousands of times and probably never gave it a second thought. It is the cattail, scientifically known as Typha latifolia and Typha angustifolia. That tall plant with the distinctive brown cylindrical head that looks like a corn dog on a stick. It grows in every marsh, every pond edge, and every roadside ditch, from Minnesota down to Florida, and from California all the way to Maine. It thrives in USDA hardiness zones 3 through 10, covering nearly the entire continental United States. The Apache knew this. The Navajo knew this. The Ojibwe people called it one of the greatest providers in nature, using every part of it for food, shelter, and medicine. Tribes separated by thousands of miles and completely different cultures independently arrived at the same conclusion about this one plant. They called it nature's supermarket. And they were right. You have walked past this plant your entire life. It has been right there, quietly waiting. And that is exactly what makes what I am about to share with you so important. Now that you know what this plant is and where it comes from, let me show you the numbers. Because once you see them, you will never look at a bag of flour at the grocery store the same way again. A research study conducted near Wolcott, New York, measured cattail productivity under real growing conditions. Researchers harvested 140 tons of rhizomes per acre from a single stand of cattails. To put that in perspective, the average potato yield across the United States runs about 20 tons per acre, and the potato is considered one of our most productive food crops. Cattail produced 7 times more root mass than our best-performing tuber, without a single pound of fertilizer, without irrigation, and without anyone planting a seed. When you process those rhizomes into flour, the yield works out to approximately 6,475 pounds per acre per year. Wheat gives you somewhere between 200 and 400 pounds per acre. That is a 16-to-1 ratio in favor of a plant that grows wild in every state in the country. The nutritional profile backs it up completely. The rhizomes contain up to 70% starch by dry weight, putting them in the same category as commercial cornstarch. Caloric density comes in at around 266 calories per 100 grams, almost identical to wheat flour, with meaningful amounts of manganese, vitamin K, magnesium, and dietary fiber in every serving. But here is what really caught my attention. A 2021 study, published in the International Journal of Food Science, found that cattail rhizome starch contains a resistant starch content of approximately 37%. Resistant starch is the kind your body does not fully digest in the small intestine. Instead, it moves into the colon, where it feeds beneficial gut bacteria, helps stabilize blood sugar, and keeps you feeling full significantly longer than regular flour. That is a nutritional advantage most premium health foods on the market today simply cannot match. And on top of all that, cattail flour contains zero gluten. Laboratory tested and confirmed, completely free of the peptides that trigger celiac disease. For the roughly 7% of Americans living with gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, this is not a minor detail. This is a genuinely life-changing alternative that has been growing wild and free for thousands of years. So with all of that going for it, you are probably asking yourself the same question I asked years ago. Why has nobody been talking about this? The answer comes down to economics. The American seed industry generates approximately $60 billion per year, built entirely on one principle. Farmers must purchase new seed every single season. Hybrid varieties, patented genetics, and proprietary breeding programs all exist to guarantee that repeat transaction, year after year. Cattail does not fit that model. You cannot patent it. Once established, it spreads on its own through underground rhizomes, becoming a permanent food source that generates zero recurring revenue. And zero recurring revenue means zero corporate research investment, zero marketing budget, and zero incentive for anyone in the agricultural supply chain to ever put this plant in front of you. Experts at Cornell Cooperative Extension have noted that cattails along a pond edge can match the growth rate of fertilized corn in a field. The same productivity, with none of the inputs. And yet over the past 2 centuries, the United States drained approximately 90% of its natural wetlands and converted them into cornfields and soybean fields, requiring annual seed purchases, chemical fertilizers, and pesticide applications every single year. The global flour market generates $260 billion annually, and right now, multiple government agencies are actively publishing guides on how to eliminate cattail populations, classifying them as invasive nuisance vegetation and recommending herbicide treatments to destroy them. They are spending public money to eradicate the most productive flour plant on the continent. That is not a conspiracy. That is just economics. But here is the good news. Now that you understand the history and the numbers, I want to show you something most videos on this topic never get into. Exactly how to grow this plant intentionally, manage it like a professional, and set yourself up for a harvest that will last for decades. This is the part most people never get to hear. Because most of what you find online about cattails stops at the history and the numbers. Nobody walks you through how to actually grow this plant intentionally, manage it through the seasons, and keep it productive for decades without it taking over your entire property. That is exactly what I am going to do right now. The first thing to understand is that you have options depending on your space and your goals. I want to walk you through 3 different approaches, and you can choose the one that fits your situation best. The first approach is container growing, and this is what I recommend for anyone who is just getting started or has a smaller backyard pond or water garden. All you need is a durable plastic container of at least 1 gallon, ideally larger. Fill it with heavy clay loam soil, not regular potting mix. Potting soil is too light and will float out into the water, destabilizing your plant. Place the container in your pond or wet area so the water line sits right at the rim of the container. That is it. The plant does the rest. If you are working with a smaller water feature or even a half-barrel pond, look specifically for the dwarf cattail variety, sometimes sold as dwarf bulrush. It only reaches 2 to 3 feet tall and grows beautifully in a 5-gallon bucket. Container growing gives you complete control over spread, and it is by far the cleanest way to manage the plant in a limited space. The second approach is pond margin planting, and this is ideal if you have an existing backyard pond with natural banks. The key insight here, which I learned from research published by the Missouri Department of Conservation, is that cattails thrive most aggressively in water that is between 6 and 12 inches deep. So when you are designing or reshaping your pond edges, aim for a gradual slope of 3-to-1, meaning for every 3 feet you move away from shore, the water deepens by 1 foot. Any area that drops below 18 inches of depth will naturally discourage cattail growth, acting as a biological boundary. You are essentially using water depth as a free management tool built right into your landscape design. The third approach is a naturalized area, where you allow cattails to establish and spread freely in a designated wet zone on your property. This is the highest yield method if you want serious flower production, but it requires a clear management plan from day one, which brings me to the seasonal care calendar. In spring, roughly March through May, this is your planting and dividing window. If you want to expand your stand or start a new one, dig up a section of rhizome with healthy roots attached, divide it into manageable sections, and replant in a suitable wet location. Spring is also when you can harvest the young shoots when they are between 4 and 16 inches tall. They taste remarkably similar to asparagus when boiled or sautéed lightly. If you choose to fertilize, apply a balanced water garden fertilizer once, at the very beginning of spring, and do not fertilize again for the rest of the year. The plant will pull everything else it needs directly from the water around it. In summer, June through August, the plant enters its most aggressive growth phase, and you want to largely leave it alone. One critical mistake I see new growers make is cutting their cattails in May. Cutting in May actually stimulates growth and makes the plant harder to manage. If you need to do any cutting, wait until late summer. What you do want to do in early summer is harvest the yellow pollen. This is one of the most rewarding harvests the plant offers. When the male flower heads are fully coated in bright golden pollen, hold a large Ziploc bag over the top of the stalk and give it a firm but gentle shake. You will collect a surprising amount of fine golden powder that functions as a high-protein flour supplement. Use it immediately in pancakes or bread, or freeze it for later. Fall, from September through November, is the most important season for serious flower production. This is when the plant has spent all summer storing energy in its rhizomes in preparation for winter, and starch content in the roots reaches its absolute peak. After the plant begins to die back, cut the stalks down to about 8 inches above the water surface using sharp pruning shears or a gas-powered weed trimmer. Never use electric tools near water. Rake the cuttings away from the pond and add them to your compost pile. Critically, cut off and remove the seed heads before they dry out and split open. Each seed head contains up to 200,000 seeds that can travel miles on the wind. Removing them before they disperse is the single most effective thing you can do to control where your cattails grow next season. In winter, December through February, the plant goes dormant above the waterline, but the rhizomes remain fully intact below the mud. You can continue harvesting roots throughout winter if you need to, and the starch quality remains good. Cutting in winter has very little effect on the plant's stored energy reserves, so if you only have time for one management session per year, save it for fall. Now let me give you 2 expert techniques for keeping spread under control no matter which method you choose. First, if you want a hard boundary, bury a thick plastic root barrier to a depth of 18 inches around your growing area. Rhizomes spread horizontally through the mud at depths of 6 to 24 inches, and a buried barrier stops them cold. Second, if you want to reduce or eliminate an unwanted stand without chemicals, cut the plant below the waterline 2 to 3 times per growing season. Each time you cut below the waterline, you force the plant to burn through its stored root energy to regrow. Do this consistently, and the roots gradually exhaust themselves over 1 to 2 seasons. Before I move on, I want to give you one safety note that most foraging guides skip over, and I consider it essential. Cattail rhizomes are highly effective at absorbing heavy metals and chemical pollutants from surrounding water. That is actually one of their ecological benefits in nature. But it means you should never harvest from sites near industrial areas, golf courses, heavily fertilized farmland, or any waterway that receives chemical runoff. Grow your own in clean water, or forage only from clean, uncontaminated sources. Your flour is only as clean as the water your plant grew in. Now that you know how to grow and manage this plant through every season, let me walk you through the actual harvest and processing. Because this is where everything comes together, and I want to make sure you leave today knowing exactly what to do from the moment you step into the water to the moment you pull fresh flour out of your kitchen. The best time to harvest rhizomes is late fall, after the plant has fully died back above the waterline and the starch reserves in the roots are at their peak. Put on your waders or waterproof boots and step into the shallow edge of your pond or planting area. Find a standing cattail stalk and follow it down into the mud with your hand, pushing through the soft sediment until you feel a horizontal stem running sideways away from the base of the plant. It will feel spongy and rope-like, roughly the thickness of your finger. That is your rhizome. Give it a gentle tug. If you see a nearby cattail plant wiggle, you know you have found a connected section. Use a knife to cut both ends free, then slowly pull the rhizome out of the mud. It will come out looking like a strange reddish-brown root, covered in tiny thread-like side roots along its length. Do not be discouraged by how it looks. What is inside is what you are after. Once you have gathered a good amount, soak them in warm water for about an hour to loosen the mud. Then scrub them clean and peel away the fibrous outer layer, just like you would peel a carrot. Work carefully and get all the spongy outer rind off. The inner core should be firm, dense, and white. If the core feels soft or discolored, set it aside and do not use it. Only process the firm white cores. From here you have two solid options for making flour. The first method is the water extraction method, and it is the one I use most often because it produces the cleanest starch. Break your peeled rhizome cores into pieces and drop them into a large bowl or bucket of cold water. Work them vigorously with your hands, kneading and squeezing until the water turns milky white with released starch. Let the mixture sit undisturbed for about 3 hours. The starch will settle to the bottom while the fibrous material floats. Pour off the water carefully, then spread the remaining starch paste onto a flat tray and let it dry completely in the sun or in a low oven. Once fully dry, it breaks into a fine powder that stores well in a cool, dry place, away from moisture and insects. The second method is the grating method, which works well if you want a more hands-on traditional approach. Grate the peeled rhizome cores on a box grater or pulse them in a food processor. Wrap the grated material in a clean cloth and squeeze the liquid through into a bowl. Let that liquid settle for a few hours. Pour off the water and dry the remaining starch the same way. This method gives you a slightly coarser texture but works beautifully for flatbreads and pancakes. And do not overlook the pollen. In early summer, before you even think about the rhizomes, the male flower heads at the top of each stalk will be covered in fine golden yellow pollen. All you need is a large Ziploc bag. Cup the bag around the pollen-covered head and give the stalk a firm shake. You will collect a generous amount of bright golden powder in just a few minutes. Use it right away, blend it into pancake batter, bread dough, or soup, or seal it in a bag and freeze it for later in the year. It adds a mild, slightly nutty flavor and a meaningful boost of protein to anything you mix it into. When it comes to using cattail flour in the kitchen, the simplest approach is to start with a 50-50 blend. Replace half the wheat flour in any standard recipe for flatbread, pancakes, or quick breads with cattail flour and see how it performs. Most home bakers find the transition easy. The flavor is mild and slightly sweet, with none of the bitterness that puts people off many wild food experiments. For soups and stews, you can use cattail starch straight as a thickener, the same way you would use cornstarch. It works extremely well and adds a clean, neutral base that does not compete with your other flavors. One afternoon of processing a good harvest can give you enough flour to last weeks. The rhizomes regrow on their own after harvest. The colony expands every season whether you intervene or not. And once you have an established stand of cattails on your property, you have a food source that will outlast any supply chain disruption, any price spike at the grocery store, and any failed growing season. Let me bring this full circle for a moment. We started today with a number that most people find hard to believe. 6,475 pounds of flour per acre, growing wild, on 6 continents, in every temperate climate on Earth, without a single human input. A plant that thrives on nothing more than sunlight, water, and time. A plant that fed human beings for at least 30,000 years before the first bag of wheat flour ever existed. The flour industry will not tell you about this. The seed companies have nothing to sell you here. The agricultural extension offices receive no corporate funding to research it. But the plant remains. It is growing right now, in the pond at the end of your road, in the ditch along the highway you take to work, in the wet corner of land behind the park where your grandchildren play. The next time you walk past a stand of those familiar brown cattail heads, I want you to stop for just a moment. Because what you are looking at is not a weed. It is a food system that has been waiting patiently for you to rediscover it. If you have ever grown cattails, foraged rhizomes, or made anything with cattail flour, I genuinely want to hear about it. Drop your experience in the comments below. And if you are brand new to this, tell me what state you are in. I read every comment, and I will do my best to point you toward the nearest wild stand to get you started. If this video opened your eyes to something you did not know before, please hit the like button and share it with someone who you think would appreciate it. Subscribe to Roots and Garden Secrets if you have not already, because we have more of this kind of deep, practical knowledge coming your way every single week. The knowledge is out there. We just have to be willing to look for it.